Welcome everyone to this very special session of the Jaipur Dialogues, where we're going to do a book launch, rather two book launches of two very, very extraordinary books. So on behalf of Garuda Prakashan, Garuda Books, I want to introduce both of our authors and both of the books to you. So welcome Francois Gautier to the show, to the launch of the book. And welcome Sanjay Dixit, welcome.
Namaste.
So, neither of these authors need any introduction, so I'm not going to belabor you with all the formalities of any kind of introduction here. Sanjay ji doesn't need to be introduced. Francois doesn't need to be introduced. They're most well-known names, but the books definitely need to be introduced. So we're going to make the books the stars of the show here. So we're just going to start off by holding up. Francois, can you hold up the book? This book is called An Entirely New History of India. An Entirely New History of India. Absolutely fabulous, fabulous book. Thank you, Francois. Thank you so much. So, and the second book we're going to launch is Sanjay Dixit's book, which is Unbreaking India, Decisions on Article 370 and the CAA. Unbreaking India, Decisions on Article 370 and the CAA. I know so many people, so many of you are very, very eager to get your hands on this book. So are we. It's going through the final post-production processes. We want to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and it comes out fabulously. So the Garuda team is working very, very hard to get that book into your hands, and I know you're very eager to do that, to have that happen. And also, these books are available. Francois's book is available right now on garudabooks.com, and Sanjayji's book is available for pre-order. So definitely take that opportunity to do that as well as we go into it. So I'm going to start with you, Francois. And then the first question that was really coming to my mind was, this is not even the first time you've written a history of India. I know you did one earlier as well, and there is so much passion that you have about this topic. And it's so evident that you've been really, really passionate about this topic. And I know there are many people, who've come to India for the spiritual journey, for seeking enlightenment, for liberation. Where does this quest for Indian history come?
No, by accident, actually. I came to India by accident. I think I spoke about it in an earlier Jaipur dialogue. I had a friend whose father was the last French governor of Pondicherry, because Pondicherry used to be French. So this guy was my childhood friend, and his parents knew my parents. And I just completed my 18th year, and I wanted to see the world. And, I felt that I needed some answer to many questions I had. And my friend told me there's a caravan of cars driving from Paris to Pondicherry to start a city called Auroville. And, I didn't know anything about India or spirituality. Auroville is based on Sri Aurobindo's vision. And there was a French lady who was Sri Aurobindo's companion, spiritual companion. She was French, called the Mother of Pondicherry. So I didn't know anything about it, and I was very young and very innocent. But I took this caravan of cars that drove from Paris to Delhi, actually, crossing many countries, many adventures. I've written a book in French about it because it was a very journey full of experience and visions. And then came to Delhi, and in Delhi I opened a book written by Sri Aurobindo called The Life Divine. It was translated in French by the mother. Some of the chapters are translated. And in Delhi one evening in the Sri Aurobindo ashram, my first night in India, I opened that book, and I felt I had come home, and I would stay there for the rest of my life, and I would defend this country. But then we drove from Delhi to Pondicherry. It took another 2 weeks. There were 5 cars, they were not in very good condition. And in those days, the roads were very small. So we did reach Pondicherry. I met the mother, and it was, when you met the guru, it was a extraordinary experience. And I stayed in the Shrobindo ashram for 8 years. As a sadhak, reading Shrobindo, working in the garden, going to the samadhi of Shrobindo, meditating there. And then the mother died, and when the guru dies, it's a great loss. It was a great shock for me, a great loss. And I had done some journalism and photography before leaving France, so I started freelancing in the south of India. And then I became a political journalist because I believe politics is life and one needs to get into politics, at least as a journalist. And I started covering Kashmir. And in Kashmir, my eyes were open. I saw the Hindus of Kashmir, they called the Kashmiri Pandit, chased out under my eyes, killed, some of them killed, some of the women raped, some of them strangled with wire. And they fled the valley of Kashmir, for no other reason that they were a different religion than the majority that was there in the valley of Kashmir. So this opened my eyes, and I started studying Indian history. Again, by accident, and I was very, I'm neither a journalist nor a professor. It all happened naturally. So I started studying Aurangzeb particularly, and then from Aurangzeb I went to Shivaji Maharaj, because of course I am a Frenchman, and the French are all in awe of Napoleon. Napoleon was an extraordinary warrior. He was a great statesman also. Not many people in here know that he was a very great statesman. He made some laws, he made a lot of buildings. He wanted to unite Europe. So I started studying Shivaji Maharaj, who's, an extraordinary man himself. I would say even above Napoleon in terms of vision and being a vibhuti, as Sri Aurobindo said. And from there, Maharana Pratap and so many. And then I started writing books, of course, because I realized that Indian history was not written as it happened. Like Shivaji Maharaj gets very little mention, though he's he's probably one of the greatest warriors that India has known. Many great warriors and statesmen, but Shivaji Maharaj with 300-400 men fought against the most powerful army in the world, that of Aurangzeb, and defeated him actually, because when Shivaji Maharaj was born, Aurangzeb was at its peak. Its army, the treasury was the biggest in the world. He had the biggest army, most powerful army. He had the most money in the world. But Shivaji Maharaj died at the age of 52. The Mughal Empire started to crumble. And in fact, Aurangzeb wrote a will by hand. He was a very meticulous and very meticulous emperor who lived very old. He lived till 80, which was very old for that age. And he wrote a will by hand. And he said two things. He said, my biggest mistake was to let Shivaji Maharaj escape from Agra. He had tricked Shivaji Maharaj to come to Agra, which was then the capital of the Mughal Empire, and then put him under house arrest, rather tent arrest, with a 7-ring of security around him. And Shivaji Maharaj, with only, again, with wits and his extraordinary courage and vision, escaped. So extraordinary man, that gets a few lines only. Some of history books in India call him a plunderer because he needed plunder to, feed his army and to continue his battle against a man that he considered as a foreigner. Unfortunately, the Mughals have become the heroes in most history books. Not only Indian, but also Westerners. You have people who are fascinated, like Audrey Truschke from United States. Even in France, there are so many people fascinated by the Mughals. So Indian history is written head down. It's like what is good and true has been stifled, and what has been very bloody and very cruel has been raised to the pinnacle. So that's how I started writing books. And my first book actually was there was a gentleman called Sitaram Goel. Both of you know him, of course. He was a Hindu warrior at the time where it was not fashionable. There was no social media. There was, the entire mainstream media was against Hindus, against the BJP. But Sitaram Goel was a pioneer and a fearless man. And he had read some of my articles in Indian Express, and I used to write for a Bombay paper called Blitz, which was headed by a gentleman, a Parsi gentleman called Mr. Karanjia. I wrote a lot about Kashmir, a lot about Ayodhya. And Sitaram Goel saw the articles and he wrote me a letter. There was no email yet, asking me whether I would like to publish with his. He had a publishing house called Voice of India, to publish, like a compilation of my articles. And I told him, I met him subsequently. I told him I would rather write a book from scratch. So I wrote my first history book called The Wonder That Is India, because there's another history book written by an Australian, Mr. Basham, which is called The Wonder That Was India. So indeed, Mr. Basham praises India, but it's like, Indians were good in certain things, but the rest, they were very, very divided, and so it's actually a bit of a negative book. So I wrote that first book, and then I started writing books, but I started making exhibitions also, because when I was in Kashmir, I was so touched by the Kashmiri Pandit, by their plight, that I had sworn to myself that I would do something for them. So when I went back to Delhi, with the help of Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who always supported my foundation, which is called FACT, Foundation Against Continuing Terrorism. So from the beginning, Sri Sri was a great supporter. So with his help, financial help, and the help of Mr. Advani, who was then the Deputy Prime Minister of India, I mounted an exhibition of the Kashmiri Pandit, and I opened it in Delhi's Habitat Center with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and Mr. Advani, and many other came, Dr. Karan Singh, and so many people came to see that exhibition, which then I took around India. And then I did something on Aurangzeb, because, as I said, Aurangzeb was a very meticulous emperor. Whatever he did, he had it written, in Farsi and sealed with the emperor's seal. So he would look at it, and then he would put himself very often the emperor's seal on it. So these are all preserved. Whatever is ordered, whether it's the breaking of the Somnath temple, or the imposing of the jizya tax on Hindus, or forbidding Hindus to ride elephant, palanquin, or horses. It is there, preserved. But unfortunately, none of the so-called great historians of modern India, like Romila Thapar or Irfan Habib, people who praise Aurangzeb and said that he's being targeted by extremist Hindus, care to look at his films, because they're there. I went to see the chief minister of Rajasthan. In those days, she was Mrs. Rajesh Singh, and she gave us access to the Bikaner archive, where many of Aurangzeb's firmans are kept. And my professor of Indian history for the Aurangzeb exhibition, Professor V.S. Bhatnagar, who was the dean of the Department of History, Jaipur University, got them scanned, translated in Hindi and English. And upon this firman, these edicts, we made a series of paintings without commentaries, with absolutely no commentary. We showed, for instance, Aurangzeb trampling with his elephants. He himself was there on one of his elephants, trampling Hindus protesting jizya tax in Delhi. This is a historical fact. Nobody can dispute that. We show, of course, Aurangzeb writing his own will. We show his orders, for instance, ordering the destruction of the Mathura temple, the Krishna Mathura temple, and that the murtis, the idols, be buried under the step of the mosque that was built upon that temple. So again, there's an order, nobody can dispute that. So we have a painting showing that. So this exhibition was shown in, again, opened by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, to whom I'm very grateful for his support over the years, because it's been a very difficult task, actually. This Aurangzeb exhibition, lent me to a lot of trouble. It was closed in Chennai by the police, and it's broken down. They kept it 6 months, and then I brought it to Pune after having repaired it, and even then now it is in the museum, which I started. But even then, sometimes people come and start objecting about it. That why do you want to revive the past? The problem with Indian history is that people tell you, why do you want to revive the past? Let it lie. Why you want to bring up communal disharmony? And so I say, no nation can really face the future unless they know their own history, the good and the bad. And I think many of many of India's great saints have said the same thing, including Swami Vivekananda, is that Indian history has been swept under the carpet by Mr. Nehru in 1947. Uh, of course, before for the British for their own reasons, because they wrote most of the Indian history, including the Aryan invasion theory, which has divided India like nothing else. But Mr. Nehru chose to, take whatever the British had, including the writing of Indian history, and so swept under the carpet many of India's heroes and heroines who were of a great level. Whether they were the heroes like Maharana Pratap or Shivaji Maharaj, or the Raja of Vijayanagar was a very enlightened. They were very enlightened kings, or heroines like of course Rani of Jhansi, who was known for good and bad reasons. But also Rani Kito Chenama, or Alia Bai of Olka was an extraordinary queen, not even of royal blood, adopted. So these have all been swept under the carpet. So as a result, other foreigner, other Frenchman who'd been brought up part of my culture, of my heroes and heroines. We have Jeanne d'Arc in France, and even today, Jeanne d'Arc is a great heroine. I mean, for not only for Christian, but for every schoolboy, every schoolgirl. So in India, you have such great heroes and heroines, and they're swept under the carpet. So as a result, the youth of India grows without roots, without feeling pride about being Indian. No pride in being Indian. So they're only good for export. We see that the greatest brain drain in the world. Luckily now we have COVID, and it's closed down the border. But the greatest brain drain in the world is that of the Hindus. All the best brains have gone abroad. The doctors, the surgeons, the IT people. I think in England, 60 to 70% of the doctors in England are Indians. Many of them Hindus. In the US, many of the IT engineers are Indians. Many of them Hindus. So, because Indian children are not taught about the greatness of the history and also the drama. We see today that the Kashmiri Pandit, which is a fairly recent episode, which is part of Indian modern history, is barely mentioned. I mean, in the south, because I shuttled between Delhi and Pune, where my museum is, and Pondicherry. In the south, people don't know about the Kashmiri Pandit. They don't know that their own people became refugees in their own country. This is something unheard of, refugees in their own country.
This was one thing I really noticed, in the book, is that we are used to reading histories that actually ignore the most important parts of history. So it was such a refreshing thing to read your book, because the whole process of colonization, of course, was rewriting other people's history, and this is what the British did for their own agendas, as you mentioned, and unfortunately, even after independence, the process of colonization, rather than being stopped, it actually continued on. It continued and accelerated. And you mentioned this one phrase that I really like. There was also a forgetting of India in Europe that you mentioned. There is a forgetting of India where, even though the Greeks you mentioned were influenced by the Indians, there was a Hegelian kind of blanket that was put on that, where everything from India was then deemed backward, and while tracing their own science and history from the Greeks. So I thought that was a very interesting perspective, especially coming from somebody who grew up in Europe and now who's embraced the Indic view. Can you speak a little bit about this? How did Europe forget India?
Sure. I mean, in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, in my country, France, and I think in many other countries, India was known as a country of wisdom and philosophy. Many of philosophers and writers quote, the Upanishad or the Vedas or Sanskrit. In sciences, there are French astronomers who say that Indians knew the distance between the sun and the moon much before us. They calculated much before us. So there was a knowledge of India. I mean, there was Sanskrit chairs, Sanskrit chairs in the main French universities where students could learn Sanskrit, which is gone today. I think it's gone today. So there is a forgetting of India, and I think this is due mainly due to the missionaries, the British missionaries that came to India. Of course, some of them were also French missionaries in French India, but very small number, and they could not tolerate that such an ancient culture could be recognized in the West, and that it could be quoted as a place of wisdom and a place of wealth also, because India was a very wealthy country even at the time of the Mughals. It's the British who ruined India physically and also culturally, who took a lot of artifacts out of India, and who also brought. You all know the story of Macaulay, that Macaulay was an admirer. He was also an admirer of Indian culture, of Sanskrit, but he decided that the British could not control India unless they controlled the minds of Indians. At least the Indians, the upper class, those were close to the British. So it is Macaulay who started sending to British universities like Oxford or Cambridge Indians who came back anglicized. And today we see that the people who criticize the most Indians are descendants of these people, what's called brown sahibs. So to say that there was a forgetting on India, it was due to the missionaries. At some point in the 19th century, I think till Nietzsche, because Nietzsche used to quote, from the Upanishads, Hegel, all the great German philosophers of what is called existentialism, used to quote from Indian scriptures. But when Nietzsche died, with him died, there was a forgetting of India, which was, voluntary in the sense that, this is a country of pagan who adore, stone gods. They need to be not only colonized but Christianized. So that was the reasoning, and the forgetting of India happens. So there are a few philosophers in France. There is a philosopher called Roger Paul who tried to revive that knowledge that India was and is still a place of knowledge. And he quotes Western philosophers who used Indian scriptures, and he quotes astronomers and scientists in the West. Einstein, I think, knew about the Vedas, for instance. That forgetting of India is still happening today because the Indologists in the West continue to perpetuate the tradition of a country of slums, of poverty, of Hindus who are fundamentalists, Muslims who are persecuted. We saw that during the removal of Article 370 by Mr. Modi, and the Western press was supposed to enlighten the readers, because most of the Western readers, whether in the US or in France, are very ignorant about India, but not in an aggressive way, in an innocent manner. So they rely on newspapers, television. The journalist was the Western correspondent posted in Delhi, and of course the Indologists, people like Christophe Jaffrelot or Mr. Witzel in the US. They rely on these people to give them first-hand knowledge. But these people keep on, running down India, and so as a result, and it pains me, as a lover of India, because I'm a militant guy. I'm a Frenchman, and I feel that, when there's injustice, it needs to be fought. And what I saw in Kashmir triggered that militancy in me, that something so unfair, so violent, so cruel, needs to be redressed. I try to do it, with my writing, my articles, my books, my museum, but this is not enough, I guess. But this forgetting of India, which is still going on today, is something that makes me angry, because it's a very few people. In France, there are a handful of people who are sponsored by the French government, who are entrusted with, enlightening the French about India. And these people, the leader of these people, Christophe Jaffrelot, has made his lifelong task to demonize Hindu. He's written book after book demonizing Hindus. His latest book is to show that Hindus who have, NRIs, who have done well in the US, in the UK, are using their money to promote a dangerous far right, in India. But people in France accept it because they're ignorant and innocent. I'm publishing a book on Ayurveda in French next month, with Flammarion, one of the biggest publishers in France. And the lady who was in charge of that book in Flammarion, a very nice lady, very decent, So in the end, I wrote about, the greatness of India, who kept alive its civilization. And she told me, how can you say that? Mr. Modi is a monster, is a Nazi. And she took it out of my book because she's misinformed by the people who are supposed to inform her. So that misinformation started by the British, the forgetting of India, it's still going on today. Hence I wrote this book. I wrote this book, and I made sure that I spoke about it because it's so important.
Yes, yes. So one of the other interesting things, and I'm going to cut off to Sanjay ji, you mentioned the CA and the other things. One of the other interesting, I don't think I've read any history book which is a comprehensive history book on India which talks about things like the Goa Inquisition, and this is such a, I mean, I hardly knew so many of these things, that there was this whole, I mean, I didn't even know what the Inquisition was. We are completely, this is erased. Anybody in Europe would know what the Inquisition was, but people in India don't know what the Inquisition was, even when there was an Inquisition literally on their shores. So tell us a little bit about what is an Inquisition and why did you decide to put this into the book? I think your sound is gone, Francois.
So I'm saying that there are books, fairly amount of books written by Portuguese and English writers, and even French. There was a Frenchman who was there during the Inquisition that give detailed description of the Inquisition and show the horror, and the cruelty that the Portuguese demonstrated during their colonization of India. So there is information. So what I did, I knew about the Inquisition and I wanted to do an exhibition on it for my museum. This came after, once the museum was started. So I went to Goa, which had been already under the BJP government for at least 8 years. And I was surprised to see that not only all the signs of the Inquisition have been wiped out, the place where Hindus were crucified, because in the beginning, it was not only Hindus, it was Jews. There were some Jews which had emigrated to India. There were some Jews, even some Muslims also, but mainly Hindus. The place where they were crucified had been, wiped out. Someone showed me on the road, where cars were passing by. The place where they kept in prison and interrogated and the torture also gone. So, and there's nothing in museum. I visited the museums in Goa. Nothing, no mention of the Inquisition, as if the BJP itself wants to forget about it. I mean, I'm a little, I was a little upset actually when I went to Goa because I went there to get information for my exhibition, and I found nothing. The Indian government wants to forget about it.
It's almost a deliberate forgetting that is being introduced. It's like all of the horrors that are inflicted. I mean, no other country does that. It's like saying that you don't have a Holocaust museum. You take out the Holocaust museum. You take out all of the things that actually talk about the atrocities that happened. So that was one very refreshing thing to find that in your book and being.
I use the books to mount the exhibition. It is now in the museum. I got a painter and I used the books. I bought a number of books. Portuguese, French, English, and very detailed. And so my painter, we did scenes of. We showed, how the Portuguese arrived in India, how they were welcomed by the Zamindar, but how they betrayed welcome and started, killing people, and then how they took Goa and began to rape women or ask them to convert. Many of the Goans today, those who haven't fled, because some of the Hindus fled to Upper Karnataka, and I know some of them actually, but those who didn't flee, they converted. The Goans today were very proud of their so-called Portuguese, Indian heritage. Just convert, grandsons of converted people by force, and so what the Portuguese did was terrible, and they even had to be kicked out of India. Even Mr. Nehru, who was such a peaceful man, had to sign his stand because the Portuguese refused to depart. So very, very shameful reign, and I think it needed to be properly documented.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just cut off. Very quickly to talk about CA, but one hot tidbit from your book, which is, this is really going all the way to contemporary history. You have a chapter on Modi ji, and you also have a chapter on Sonia Gandhi, which is again to me was very fascinating because it's coming from somebody who grew up in Europe and who brings also a European perspective. So Sonia Gandhi's ancestry, it's very interesting that people are banding about this term Hindu fascists and so on and so forth for Hindus, which has absolutely actually nothing to do with fascism. It's a fascism is a it's a European movement, and more the history is it's very much aligned with the church. So it's kind of associated with right wing Christianity, and it's a European movement. And so there is some links of Sonia Gandhi that you uncover that people might find very startling.
Yeah, I mean, I was as a white man, I was ashamed very often because I covered Sonia Gandhi extensively in Delhi, and particularly when she was made Congress president. And I was ashamed to see the way Indians would bow down in front of her. It made me angry and ashamed. Though I can understand that she lived, great trauma. Her mother-in-law Indira Gandhi died on her knees, being taken to the hospital in a car after having been shot by a sick bodyguard. Her husband was blown to pieces by the Tamils, by Tamil separatists. I was there actually. I was supposed to interview Rajiv Gandhi that day. So I understand the trauma that she went through, and I respect her for that. But the way Indians bow down to her and the way she accepts it, I remember her coming to the Congress headquarters, which was just walking distance. It's like 20 steps from a residence in Janpat, to the Akbar Road Congress. I remember her coming with like 20 cars, and police and so much police protection and people surrounding her. It made me ashamed and angry. So I spoke against Sonia Gandhi extensively in my articles and vocally at a time where very few people dare to speak about her because she was the Queen of India. She was the Empress.
It was
Manmohan
dangerous.
Singh was
Yeah.
but she was the Empress, and one word of her actually, people could have been killed. We know that that terrorist was left to go to Gujarat. I forgot her name. That Muslim girl terrorist was left to go to
Isha
Gujarat.
Jahan. Isha Jahan.
Yeah. Sonia Gandhi must have given the order. I'm surprised that Mr. Modi wishes her for every birthday. I guess it's a Hindu way, but I remember that very clearly. So I spoke against her, and once the French ambassador told me, I mean, a few years back when she was still the Empress, he told me, the Congress is going to kick you out of India. I mean, he told me in a nasty way because he didn't like me, and he knew that I was a supporter of Mr. Modi, who was then the Chief Minister of Gujarat, So he told me in a nasty way. He told me, the Congress is going to kick you out soon out of India. Anyway, so, I mean, if you look into Sonia Gandhi's past and you see her father was a very poor man, he was a supporter of Mussolini, and he was actually taken prisoner by the Germans. I don't think she's very educated also. I don't mind that, but the fact that she could, without shame, accept to become the unelected Empress of India. It's as if in my country, France, you have a Hindu MP who becomes above the prime minister, who's not an elected prime minister, president of France, who becomes above the president of France and rules France. It's impossible. It's impossible. But in India, an Italian woman with very little education was like the Empress of India, and I was a witness of that, and it angers me, that she was the Empress of India, an elected Empress. So I've written about it, and of course I wrote about Mr. Modi because he read about me. There was an article in the Hindu when my exhibition was broken down in Chennai, the Aurangzeb exhibition. So he had read about it, and he invited me in Ahmedabad. I met him 2-3 times there. And even then, I admired him. I knew that I saw that his ministers were the only ministers in India who actually had 4 or 5 plastic chairs in front of them, and then they had only one secretary next to them. And the people would come with real grievances or real problems or real, for something, and they would come and sit in front of the minister, and the secretary would take notes. So Mr. Modi made his ministers work for the people, and I saw it in Gujarat for the first time, and I saw also that he was a very keen environmentalist, that he was really keen on, solar energy and, and dams and irrigation. So I admired him from that time. This is why I wrote about him in the book.
Wonderful, wonderful. So the book is an entirely new history of India, an entirely new history of India by Francois Gautier. Definitely get your copy. This is not one to be missed. I learned so much in reading it and having all of it put together, this myth of the Aryan invasion and all of these different colonial artifacts that have been brought in just to create a divide between the Indian people and break the continuity of civilization. All of that gets demolished. So thank you so much, Francois, for bringing this book to us, and really, really hope that every person in India gets to read this book. That is my real wish. And so, Sanjay ji, on to you. In fact, Francois already mentioned that his motivate. He saw all this kind of propaganda happening about the CAA in the foreign countries. I mean, even in the US, all kinds of articles were written on how Modi is disenfranchising, Muslims, and it's becoming a fascist Hindu state, and all of this. What brought you to write this book, Unbreaking India: Decisions on Article 370 and CAA? Yeah.
Francois is bringing. Let me put it this way: Francois is bringing the history right from the ancient times, and it stands to reason, because ancient history, a lot of things that have happened thousands of years ago, they do tend to be forgotten. But when the CAA came and this 370 came, the nullification of 370, as I call it, when these decisions came, I was astounded to find that people had forgotten even the history of the partition. That happened only 70 years back, and it was such a terrible trauma for the country, for the countrymen, especially for the Hindus, because whether you accept it or not, and whether all the people may call that sham about, we chose to stay in India, that's a complete sham. We know that all the people who went to Pakistan, they celebrate the fact that they managed to break India, because that is how the Islamic imagery goes, that they have to conquer the entire globe. And because they managed to conquer a little part of this subcontinent, so that actually furthers their design, that they move one step ahead in that quest to conquer the globe.
So there was this notion that you brought into the book, which is the notion of the new Madhyana. So again, this is absolutely stunning. I'd never come across it, and the kind of scholarship that went into understanding what is the new Madhyana. First, you have to tell us what is the old Madhyana. What is the story of the old Madhyana, and therefore we can then look at what do you mean by new Madhyana?
Yeah, okay.
Because we are brought up on ignorance. I mean, our history books teach us nothing really of value, which would be of strategic use to us in terms of facing the challenges that we have. So we go outside and we see riots in Delhi, and we have no historical understanding of what's happening.
You see, whatever is happening, whether it is CAA or it was the partition or many of these regressive movements that you keep watching from time to time, the problem with the Muslim mind in India in general, I'm talking only specific to India, is that 90%, or let's say, you can dispute the number, between 80 to 90% of the lay Muslim is just a slave of the elite. That elite, I call them the Ashrafiya, Maulana, Mullah class, the AMM. Why? Because there is a funny concept within Islam, especially within the Hanafi Islam. You know that the Sunni Islam has four major what is called schools of jurisprudence. The Hanafi, which is there in the Indian subcontinent, the Shafi'i, the Maliki, and the Hanbali. So, out of these, the three major ones, other than the Hanbalis, they follow what is called taqleed. Taqleed means the aql or the reason is reserved for only a certain class. That's class, that's class sharif. The plural of sharif is ashraf. Okay.
Oh,
The Sharif is the plural is Ashraf. So this Ashraf class, which traces its lineage. There's the Sayyid class, which is tracing its lineage from the Prophet himself. Then there is the Sheikh class, which traces its lineage from the companions of the Prophet. So these Sayyids and Sheikhs, they form the what is called the privileged class. Why privileged class? Because that Islam is a religion where whatever is written in the Quran and the Hadith and the Sirat-e-Nabawi, that is the trilogy. This trilogy together is called Shariat. Whatever is written in Shariat is supposed to be immutable. Okay, it cannot be changed. So there are these hadiths, these traditions of that kind, which teach that that Quraysh, that is the clan of the Prophet, that shall be the privileged clan. And then, of course, the Ansar, that is the followers, the direct followers in Medina.
so this is
They will be the next. So the Sayyids and the Sheikhs, they will rule, and everybody else is not supposed to apply their aql or the reason. So the use of aql or reason is prohibited for the laity. The laity is not supposed to use that. And this Ashrafa Maulana Mullah class is adept in adapting to the political situation. They are basically a political class. They use the religion for keeping their political interests alive, and by using this bogey of following the Prophet, the traditions, that is the Sunnat, it is called. The conduct of the Prophet is called Sunnat. So they have to follow the Sunnat. In the name of the Sunnat, they not only create strife with Hindus and other non-believers, they also manage to have a complete stranglehold over their own people, the converted class, because that converted class is called, jilaf, or what is called base, low. Okay, that's its plural is ajlaf. Then there is the untouchable, it is called razil. Razil means razil or kamine. You understand the term kamine? So razil means basically they are the kind of untouchable, the outcasts, the third rates. And whereas you will find a lot of people talking about Manusmriti, and whereas I have thrown a challenge to anybody to show that there is any kind of birth-based discrimination in Manusmriti, there is none. So not many people, nobody is able to basically mount a credible challenge to that challenge that I have thrown. But in the Islamic fiqh, that schools of jurisprudence, it is written there, this class discrimination, and that the Sheikh and Sayyid, that they shall be the rulers, it is written. Even it is written that only the Quraysh can be the caliph. Even that is written.
So the real caste system is coming from there. The Islamic caste system that people don't talk about.
It is not even class system. It is a race system.
Okay, it's a race-based.
It is a race fix, and it is codified. That is something I must say, that the kind of scholarship that we have had all these years, that is not even able to point out this. And whatever has been, people have pointed this out, that has been very skillfully hidden. So all this that you see, whether it is the partition or it is the what is called the Shabana movement, or this is the CA, the seed and the motivation is this. Now, taking your next question about the Medina, the new Medina. What is Medina? Medina means basically a city. Okay, its name is Yasrib. The original ancient name of Medina is Yasrib. So you trace the Islamic history. Islamic history says that in Mecca, the Prophet lived for about after he got this revelation that is supposed to be 610. So 622, about 12 years. So he could not get many followers. Just about the estimates vary between 50 and 150 in 12 years, which is pathetic. It's almost nothing. And he was propagating a different religion, but the other Quraysh, the Banu Umayyah was the major clan, and Banu Hashimi was the Prophet's clan. These are the two sub-clans out of the major clan called Quraysh. And it was actually quite tolerant of him. And then after that, then when they thought that the Prophet was Muhammad, as they knew him, was going out of his limits, then they thought they would teach him a lesson. He came to know of it, and he left Mecca. That's called Hijrat. Hijrat means exile or flight. And he went to Medina. In Medina, he turned his religion upside down, and from some kind of a general proselytization, it became a militant proselytization, and he started using force and violence. And he consolidated himself. He grew in power. He threw out the original inhabitants of Medina who had given him shelter. And after he had gathered sufficient strength, he invaded Mecca. When he failed for the first time, he entered into a temporary treaty. It is called the Treaty of Dhabia, which is generally accepted in the Islamic history as a ruse or as some kind of a deception. And again, further, when he had become powerful enough, because after this treaty, the people in Mecca thought that they had fought peace, because that was for 10 years. But he broke it on some excuse, and then invaded Mecca and captured Mecca, then on the pain of sword converted them. So this is the story of Medina, going from Mecca to Medina and capturing Mecca back. So I have traced this entire history in this book of how it happened during the partition, because during the partition there were two major competing voices. Both of them had the same purpose. Whether it was the Barelvi or it was the Devbandis, both said that they had the same strategy, and the strategy was to completely Islamize India, or the Indian subcontinent, or Barre Saghir, that is, it is called in Urdu. So they had to Islamize it completely in order to fulfill the prophecy of Islam or the purpose of Islam, because the purpose of Islam is to first capture the entire globe politically, convert it, and once they have converted it, and then seek what is called the last day of judgment. The last day of judgment comes only after the entire world has turned Muslim. That is the kind of imagery that Islam provides. So both had the same strategy, but then one said, the Barelvis said, that we will follow Sunnat. Now, Barelvis are quite fanatical about Sunnat, meaning they are very fanatical about the Prophet, because they attribute certain divine powers to him. Devbandis and other sects of Islam, they refute them on that point. They do not ascribe divine powers to the Prophet. So their difference of opinion, because they are basically Sufis, all the Barelvis. The Barelvis are basically federation of all the Sufis, sects and subsects. Sects are called tariqa, subsects are called silsila. So all tariqas and all silsilas except one are under the Barelvi sect, what we have. So Barelvi said that we'll follow the Sunnat. That is okay. What we'll do is that we will go and take our own little piece of land, and that will be our Medina. And in our Medina, we will grow strong, and then we will capture the Mecca of Delhi back and re-establish the Mughal Empire.
So this is
the Barelvi.
These are
This is the Barelvi thought process, and they followed the what is called the two-nation theory, or what is called separate nation, or as in the different taqreer or the great meetings that they used to have. They used to call it Qawmiyat Juda Gana. Juda Gana meaning separate. And these fellows, the Devandis, used to call it Qawmiyat Muttahida, means unified, composite. Ittihad basically means unity, Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin, the MIM. That is, they're talking of Ittihad among Muslims, that is unity among Muslims. And still, even then, our friend OSC has the gall to call himself secular. Anyway, that's a diversion. So this is the Madhyana strategy that the Barelvis talked about, and that was the going theory among them. And almost every ashraf, every single ashraf I know of, all the people who stayed back, including people like Kafi Azmi, Javed Akhtar's Mamaji, that's a guy called Mazaz Lakhnavi, Josh Palihabadi, who later went to Pakistan, all the people who went into IPTA, all the people who went into the Progressive Writers Association, all these were singing songs and writing taranas for Pakistan. Kafi Azmi, okay, Kaif Banarsi. Then, not just that, the great Barelvis who were spearheading the Qawmiyat Judagana agitation, the sons of the founder of Barelvi sect, Sayyid Ahmad Raza Barelvi, both of them, and the great Sufi called Naimuddin Muradabadi, who actually formulated what is called the 11-point plan for Pakistan, all of them stayed back. Aligarh, that headed the movement, it remained here in full force. Then Bareilly, the hotbed of this entire movement, that not only Ala Hazrat continues, it even has a railway train named after it. So my purpose in writing this book was to bring all this back into discussion and to tell them, okay, look, fools, you are following this mirage of secularism. This AMM class has not budged a single inch from its purpose right from the 17th century, from the time of Aurangzeb. The quest remains the same, and you would be foolish, talking of ourselves, that we would be foolish to think that anything has changed. Nothing has changed in that discourse.
So how did the CAA and this 370 play into this whole politics, and why was this such a big agitation?
Yes, so this being the background, 370 took away a very large part of that veto that this AMM class had enjoyed. This veto that was enjoyed by this AMM class, because 370 was a very curious phenomenon. 370 was given to Jammu and Kashmir ostensibly because it was a Muslim majority state, whereas Congress always said that we do not believe in the two-nation theory. But the two things that they did was actually paying obeisance to this two-nation theory. First of all, signing off on the partition itself was an acceptance.
Yes.
Otherwise, if you really stuck to your principles, then you should have fought it out. And you should have told the British, okay, you go away, we'll settle it among ourselves.
Right.
If there is a civil war, then let be it. So be it. And in fact, only the societies and only the polities and only the people who are prepared for civil war are the ones who do not fight civil war.
Right.
Because the other party knows that these guys are prepared. And ultimately, we did have to fight civil war. This probably the number of casualties that happened.
Keep the country united.
Oh, there are certain, all these things have been brought out. Like Ambedkar said that, okay, let the country be divided, but on the condition that there shall be a full exchange of population. Now, this whole movement of partition was actually minority politics. Minority politics in the sense that it was led by the Muslims in those provinces where they were in minority. If you look at the entire partition movement, it's all the leadership is from those provinces where Muslims are in minority. Punjab, they were already in majority, they were not worried. And you can see the evidence from the elections that happened. Punjab, they could not form government even in 1946. Even there, the unionist government came. And it was only from some machinations by the British and the militia action by the Muslim League. Muslim League formed a National Guard kind of a movement. All those things happened. And then the unionist government fell. And after the unionist government fell, the British, instead of doing central rule, they managed to swear Muslim League back in.
Huh.
Or rather, they were planning to swear Muslim League back in, and when the resistance started happening, they threw the entire Punjab into a paroxysm of riots. And the most famous riot of all those was Amritsar riot, which has been completely forgotten. Nobody remembers. People remember Lahore, Rawalpindi, everything, but this was the Amritsar riots. And that was a kind of assertion of the what is called a power of violence that Muslim League commanded and Muslim League showed, and the Congress, weak-kneed Congress, succumbed to it. It was a tame surrender. And that is why I have quoted one particular sentence of Dr. Ambedkar quite often, and that says that the nature of Muslim politics in India is the gangster's method of politics. That is one. And the second one, which I keep reminding the RSS of, their very own, their own Sir Karyawa, H.V. Sheshadri ji has written a beautiful book on partition, where he encapsulates what is called the two behavior pattern. That throughout the partition, what was the behavior of the Muslims and what was the behavior of the national leadership. So he says that there's a Muslim behavior pattern and there's a national behavior pattern. The Muslim behavior pattern, what it says that, okay, I'll just recall for all the viewers who are watching. It says that the Muslim behavior pattern consists of accusations. It starts with acrimony, accusations, then claims, then based on those claims, demands, and demands being absurd cannot be met. So then claims, with claims also come complaints, demands, then denunciation, because demands cannot be met, so denunciation, then street rioting. This is a set pattern of Muslim national behavior right from the beginning of the 20th century, when the Ashraf Mullah Maulana class, they co-opted the Pasmanda people with them. Till that time, they would not bother about the Pasmanda or the Ajlaf and Arzal classes. And when they got them, then they put them under taqleed, and they fed them the aphrodisiac and opium of Islam and used them as cannon fodder in these rioting sprees. So this is what they kept doing. And then after independence, they kept silent for about 20 years or so. And after that, by the time they consolidated through stupidity of Jawaharlal Nehru, they got into Congress, they got into communist parties, they got into these Progressive Writers Association. A guy like Sajjad Zahir, a major leader of the Communist Party of India, who led the Muslim League election effort in the 1945-46 elections. The Muslim League was virtually fighting under his direction. He can rightly be called as the architect of Pakistan, because if Muslim League had not won the kind of mandate it did in Punjab, it would have lost all legitimate claim over the Muslim vote. Sajjad Zahir managed that on behalf of the Communist Party. He was he worked there on behalf of the Communist Party. Communist Party, you know, the Gangadhar Adhikari report and all that. I mentioned it. There's a
Yes,
full chapter on the Gangadhar Adhikari report.
part of the progressive, how the left collapsed.
And this Sajjad Zahir, when he went to Pakistan, there he tried to establish the Communist Party of Pakistan. Then he was arrested, and a charge was framed under what is called the Rawalpindi conspiracy case. At that time, Jawaharlal Nehru requested Pakistan to send him back. He was brought back. His daughter was, I think, in 2002, the Vice Chancellor of Jodhpur University. So that is the kind of laddu peda of secularism that Jawaharlal Nehru fed India, and that is why we see this kind of a situation today, because the AMM class regrouped and restarted the same activities which they had been doing pre-partition. And the first instance of that we saw when in the Shah Banu, first they made this All India Muslim Personal Law Board. This is an interesting body. It is 100% Ashraf.
Huh.
Okay? You almost need a Sharafat Nama certificate of being a Sharif to get inducted into that. The Pasmanda Mahaj has been commenting. If you follow them on Twitter, you will find their comments very interesting. He's saying that, okay, you are complaining in Bihar that there is not a single Muslim minister, or there's not a single Muslim MLA. Then how many Pasmandas have you got in the Muslim Personal Law Board?
Right.
And of course, it's silly if you don't vote for a party, then you expect to be co-opted there. Pasmanda people are also exposing them. I've interviewed a few of them in Jaipur Dialogues.
Yes.
So they continued with this. They changed the Qawmiyat Judagana to what is called Milli Tashakhus, community identity. And that same thing, when they felt very badly threatened, the veto having gone, because these Ashraf people have always wielded power, come what may, whether it is BJP in power, whether it is Congress in power, whether it is communists in power, whatever. This AMM class has always enjoyed the best of everything. This is the real privileged class in India. But that privilege, that veto that they had over the entire secular discourse, entire democratic polity of India, that was shattered after 370. Otherwise, somebody needs to ask them that why should the mainstream Indian Muslim ever favor a separate status for Jammu and Kashmir?
Right.
I mean, you can expect Jammu and Kashmir Muslim politician to do that. Why should a guy sitting in Delhi, Meerut, Aligarh, Moradabad, why should you favor that? That is only because of Milli Tashakhus. And now, that same thing in CAA, you heard all these same slogans. Tera mera rishta kya? Tera mera rishta kya? This slogan is a very old slogan, starting from the partition. Starting from the partition.
Again,
And here also, they're still chanting the same slogan, and it is mazhabi pehchan now. That they're fighting for their mazhabi pehchan. Mazhabi pehchan is equal to Qawmiyat Judagana. So that is what the whole narrative is. I've tried to expose it.
Yes. So the whole narrative of separatism has just taken on little bit different forms, but the separatism and imperialism in terms of conquest.
Yes. Islamic imperialism is there in everything that this AMM class does.
Right.
It is the biggest imperialist among all in the history of India.
Right. So again, the book is Unbreaking India, Decisions on Article 370 and the CAA. This is an absolutely must read. Like, I would say 99.9% of the educated class, and here I'm being generous, 99 would have no clue of what is in this book. The kind of history that is being exposed is simply not present. I certainly have not read anything which is really tracing the theological Islamic roots of so many of the things that happened, whether it happened in partition or what's happening now. All of these things, they've been kind of put in quotes, the secular ignorance, a deliberate secular ignorance, which is actually hiding the truth. And Sanjay ji has done just a spectacular job of exposing this. So Sanjay ji, I think our time is up. Shall we take a few questions?
I'm told we have two questions. At the same time, also, I would like to highlight that this session is sponsored by Sandeep Gunturji. So, Jaipur Dialogues would like to thank him as well. There are two questions that will come on the screen.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Okay, let's see. We have some questions coming up.
Yeah, I think saying just a minute.
Okay.
You can keep talking for a minute or so.
While the questions are coming up, I wanted to just briefly touch on this one last point. You were talking about this Adhikari thesis, the role of the so-called progressive left in fomenting partition and in fomenting the separatism. Can you just talk about? In fact, this question might even lead into that. So let me read the question. Islamo left liberals have taken complete control over media, judiciary, and universities all over the world. How can we free media, judiciary, and universities from this? And this is the same, I think talking about the Adhikari thesis also is a very good backdrop for how the so-called progressive left helped in this creation of Pakistan, led to millions of people being killed in this partition, and still they want more breaking India. So what is going on here?
You see, this whole theory about it was actually the resolution of Pakistan was in 1940. And this is the Rahmat Ali plan and all that. And the cover that we have here on the Unbreaking India is basically the Rahmat Ali map. Is what you see here.
Yes.
Is the Rahmat Ali map.
Right.
Where all the areas that are shown in green are supposed to be Pakistan. So even major part of Gujarat is Pakistan. The entire Bengal, you see only a little speck of saffron over there in the eastern part of India.
Yeah.
Then Nizam, of course, is there. Then the Malabar is very much there. Delhi is also a part of this. So they're supposed to be the even small part, even Rajasthan is a little Nawab of Tonk is probably into about 5% population of his total kingdom. Even that is supposed to be with Pakistan. So anywhere they had about 20% population supposed to be Pakistan. So that was the Rahmat Ali plan. Adhikari thesis actually was an official position paper of the Communist Party of India. The character of Communist Party of India was it was a Soviet stooge. Starting from the time of M.N. Roy when it was formed. And it was formed, in Tashkent of all the places. And it was supposed to be, the plan was to liberate India through Afghanistan. Anyway, the British were no fools, so they managed to plug that route. So they were supposed to be Soviet stooges. When the war started and the Soviet Union was on the side of Germany, so they were totally singing the Soviet tune and they were opposing Britain. And then when the war swung the other way, then suddenly from the highest echelon, their controllers, the orders come, the commands come, and they align with the British. And they align with the British, and they start supporting Jawaharlal Nehru, because Jawaharlal Nehru was a Soviet favorite as well. And in fact, right from the 1927, when he first told Soviet Union, he was always singing praise of Soviet Union. He's also the head of the leftist bloc in Congress. So this Adhikari thesis actually says that, okay, Pakistan, they justify. Pakistan is justified. And the rest of India is also not one country. It is composed of 17 nations. So basically what he's saying that give Pakistan plus split the rest of India into 17 other countries. Up till that point, this Rabat Ali plan was only some kind of a fanciful thought. But these people, by bringing this position paper, gave it the intellectual heft that consolidated it. And every time I go on a TV panel and some communists come, I just ask him this question. And I suggest anybody else who is also asked him this question. Have you disowned the Adhikari thesis? Has any component of the communists, CPI, M, ML, LLL, A, Z, F, T, whatever form of communist party, has any one of them ever disowned the Adhikari thesis? They haven't. And
that is really the root of breaking India. That's the root of Tukade Tukade gang. The Tukade Tukade
exactly.
gang that you see today is rooted in the Adhikari thesis.
Exactly. That is their it is a doctrine.
Yes.
So when they are singing that doctrine, they are singing it out of their conviction.
Right.
And we think that they are just being disingenuous. They're not. It is an established doctrine. And it is a pity that India, this country, and I again blame Jawaharlal Nehru because he was so much under the influence of the Soviet that the people he should have banned right in the beginning. He not only allowed them to flourish, he allowed them to form these progressive fronts like IPTA, like PWA, and even the Communist Party of India, Communist Party, and allowed them to flourish in spite of them not disowning the Gangadhar Adhikari thesis.
Congratulations to Sanjay ji and Francois ji on the book launches. It is like inducting Brahmos and Trishul. Thank you for the insightful discussion, Charan Sparsh and Pranam. Not just the discussion, please buy the books and give 10 copies. Take a vow that you're going to give 10 copies to all of your, quote, secular friends, not only secular friends, all of the so-called Hindu, whatever term they want to use with that, friends, because most of us are completely ignorant about it. All of the analysis that you read in newspapers, it's completely superficial. You know, when you read Sanjay ji's book, then you realize the kind of depth of what has been going on. You're able to actually analyze all these events. And, you know, it's so amazing. There's this bogus Sachar Commission report. You talk about this Ashraf and Ajlaf class, Sanjay ji. The entire Sachar Commission report, which is so obsessed with identity, doesn't even mention these words once. You know, this is the amazing thing. Whereas it's a complete, I mean, if we're talking about tackling discrimination, this should be the first step towards tackling discrimination. So, you know, this is why your book is absolutely, it's a gold mine. All of the Indian bureaucracy, Indian decision makers, and the common people, anybody who wants to write about this topic absolutely must read this book. And the other book, of course, is Francois Gautier's book, An Entirely New History of India. Please support, buy, spread the message. Thank you, Sanjay ji.
So there's some more question.
Question here. Gopal, the Modi government and BJP must surely be aware of the EMM domination of Muslim politics. Why are they not calling it out in your view? What do you think, Sanjay ji?
I know the three major Muslim leaders right now in BJP, they're all from the AMM class.
Right. Of course.
So what do you expect?
BJP has been co-opted, or BJP has basically become a party to this.
Okay, there's one more. That's some kind of a question to you.
Garuda Books available on Amazon. Yes, they are available. They are available everywhere. We do encourage you to buy from Garuda, but the books are available everywhere. So definitely Francois' book is already there, and Sanjay ji's book will be there also very shortly. It's not yet released. And the important thing though is to, you know, it's very important in part of supporting the ecosystem also to buy directly, because what happens is, as we saw with the Delhi riots book or the other books, very quickly anywhere these gatekeepers can come and become a party which is creating, saying who's going to be platformed, who's going to be deplatformed. And again, I have to commend Sanjay ji for taking a very, very principled stance. His book was ready to go. In fact, it was listed. His book was already listed on Amazon, and he took this very courageous step to say, not going to support.
The review copies had come out.
The old, this is the old cover and everything. It was already there. And so, I mean, this is where saying, putting your money where the mouth is, really standing up for principle. And this is what really we all need to do. I started Garuda for the same reason. I was having a happy, lucrative IT career. I didn't need to get into book publishing business. It's not the place where you go to make a great startup. Book publishing is not doesn't have a very high success rate. But it's very important that we invest in our own platforms, because that's the only way that we can have our voice being carried forward. Does Garuda Books have its own app like Amazon and Flipkart? We are working on this. We shall have this shortly. Yes, work is ongoing. Available on Kindle. Yes, once the print edition is released, we have a lot of pre-buys also. Once the print edition is released, we're going to also release it on Kindle for international readers. So thank you so much, Sanjay ji. This was a wonderful discussion, and as I said, we've barely scratched the surface here. This book has so much depth, and it literally has a whole sets of appendices. That in the appendix you can actually read the different acts. So many different parts are there. So absolutely go to garudabooks.com and go ahead and put in your pre-order.
Yeah, just to mention that this is also a book for the professional, because initially it was listed under the law category.
Absolutely. Very, very important. Yeah, everybody who's in law, who's in politics, who's doing any kind of writing on these topics in media, and anybody who just wants to know how did partition happen, and what are the plans for more and more partitions. So do read Unbreaking India, Decisions on Article 370 and CAA. Thank you, Sanjay.
Namaste. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.